Soft, steady voice, confessional, calm, and foreboding. Before we begin, I want you to imagine something. You're standing on the edge of the sea at night. The tide pulls at your feet, whispering in a language older than time. Somewhere out there, beneath the black water, lies a town no map remembers, a place swallowed whole by the ocean centuries ago. Tonight's story isn't about what was found there. It's about what refused to stay buried. This is the confession of a photographer whose passion for capturing the unseen led him into the deep and brought something back. I'm NightLore, and you're listening to NightLore. Settle in, turn down the lights, and remember, some places were never meant to be seen again. My name is Oliver Stubbs. I've spent most of my life looking through a viewfinder, watching the world unfold in frames and shutter clicks. My camera has always been more than a tool. It's been an anchor, the one thing that made sense when nothing else did. When I was a kid, I thought photography was magic. The idea that I could freeze a moment, steal it from time itself, it made me feel powerful. My parents thought it was just a phase, but I knew better. I didn't just take pictures. I captured the stories hiding behind them, the things most people never notice. As I grew older, that fascination became an obsession. I wasn't interested in glamour or fame. I wanted truth, the kind that hides in dark corners, in the eyes of strangers, or the silence of abandoned places. I never imagined that truth would one day stare back at me. A few years ago, I got an email that changed everything. It was from the Creepypasta Society, a historical and marine research organization based in Yorkshire. They'd read one of my articles about photographing submerged structures in the Mediterranean. They were impressed by how I described the ghosts of the deep. That phrase, ghosts of the deep, would come back to haunt me later. The message was short. They were assembling a small team to document a site recently discovered off the North Sea coast. They called it Raven Serad, an entire town drowned centuries ago, lost beneath silt and tide. They wanted someone to capture it, to make people believe it once lived. I remember staring at that email for what felt like hours. Something about it. It didn't just feel like a job. It felt like a calling. The reply I sent to the Creepypasta Society was almost impulsive. I didn't think about the pay, the risks, or the weather. I just wrote, I'm in. It felt like saying yes to something I'd been waiting for my entire life. A week later, I got a call from Dr. Catherine Howard, the project lead. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and oddly rehearsed, the kind of voice used to convince people that everything is perfectly under control. She explained that Raven Serad had been mentioned in maritime folklore for centuries, a medieval fishing town swallowed by the sea after a violent storm. Some said it sank in one night. Others whispered that it was a punishment that something down there had called the water. Howard didn't care for legends. She wanted proof, visual documentation of the site before further excavation. And that's where I came in. She said she'd been following my work for a while. You have an eye for the unseen, she told me. That's what we need. It was flattering. Too flattering. But I ignored the unease that crawled beneath her words. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the trip. My flat in London turned into chaos, diving gear lenses, waterproof casings, and backup drives scattered across every surface. I was funded generously, which only made the whole thing feel more official and more serious. Yet as I packed, a strange tension hung in the air. Not excitement, something else. Like static. It's hard to explain, but sometimes you just feel it. The silence before something goes wrong. The night before departure, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window camera in hand, scrolling through my old photos, wrecks, coral reefs, forgotten ships. Everything I'd ever photographed had been dead in its own way. But this time, it felt like I was about to step into something that was merely sleeping. Yorkshire greeted me with grey skies and the smell of salt in the air. The Sea Pass Society had set up operations near a remote harbour, its pier flanked by rusted cranes and seagulls that screamed like broken alarms, their research vessel. The Halcyon loomed against the mist, sleek white and far too modern for the ghosts it was about to chase. Dr. Howard met me on deck. She was smaller than I expected, thin, with sharp eyes that looked like they could see through seawater itself. There was warmth in her words, but her gaze never lingered. She spoke in clipped tones, efficient, like someone who'd learned not to get attached to people working under her. After a short tour of the ship, she introduced me to Callum, my dive partner. He was a big Scotsman, broad-shouldered, and bearded, his voice rough but friendly. There was something reassuring about him, a kind of easy confidence born from years underwater. He cracked jokes before every briefing, laughed at his own mistakes, and called everyone mate, even Dr. Howard. But behind the humor, I could tell he was serious about his work. Every safety check, every piece of gear, every emergency drill, he ran them twice. He said it wasn't paranoia, just respect for the ocean. We spent the next few days in preparation dives along the coast, testing equipment, calibrating cameras, and reviewing dive plans. Callum made it look easy. I wasn't new to diving, but he moved underwater with a kind of grace that didn't match his size, calm, controlled, like he belonged there. One evening, as the sun sank behind the waves, we sat on the ship's rear deck, sipping tea from metal mugs. "You ever get the feeling," he asked, staring out to sea, "that the water remembers things?" I frowned. "Remembers?" He nodded slowly. "Aye, like it holds on to what it takes. Not just wrecks or bones, but moments, pain, fear. Whatever happens down there, it doesn't let go easy." I laughed, but his words stuck. There was something in the way he said it. Not superstition, not a joke, just quiet conviction. That night, lying in my bunk, I dreamed of the sea. Not waves or currents, but streets, cobblestone streets, beneath the surface lined with windows that still glowed faintly in the dark. And somewhere below me, something moved. When I woke, my pillow was damp with sweat, and the ship's engines were already rumbling. It was time to dive. The sea was calm that morning, unnaturally calm. The kind of stillness that makes you whisper without realizing it. The crew moved in silence, eyes down, hands steady. I could feel it, that shared unspoken fear disguised as professionalism. Callum helped me into my gear. The hiss of the air tank, the tug of the straps, the sound of my own breathing echoing inside the mask. It all felt ritualistic, like we were preparing for something sacred or forbidden. "Ready?" he asked, pulling his regulator into his mouth. I nodded. We stepped over the edge and fell into the North Sea. The shock of the cold hit instantly, 1,000 needles piercing through neoprene. But once we adjusted, the world narrowed to rhythm breath, in breath, out light and dark. As we descended, the daylight fractured into green haze. Below us, the outlines began to take shape, faint at first, then clearer walls, rooftops, archways. Ravensarad. It wasn't what I expected. There was no grandeur, no mythical city of gold. It looked ordinary. A small town preserved in silt and coral. Houses half collapsed, a church spire broken at the tipstone steps, leading nowhere. Everything was draped in an eerie stillness, like time itself had drowned. We hovered over what must have been a market square. The cobblestones were buried in sand, and the skeletal remains of wooden stalls clung to the edges. Fish darted through windows. A statue, maybe of a saint, stood crooked in the center, its face eroded smooth. Even through my thick gloves, I could feel the weight of the place, the kind of quiet that presses on your skull. Callum gave me a thumbs-up signaling to start the photos. I lifted my camera. Through the lens, the town came alive, colors, textures, shapes that the naked eye missed. It was breathtaking, and yet something in me twisted. Because the more I photographed, the more it felt like I wasn't alone. A shadow flickered at the edge of my light beam gone when I turned. Probably a fish, I told myself, or maybe the movement of silt. But then it happened again, closer this time. I tried to focus on my work, but every corner of that town felt like it was watching me. The empty windows looked like eyes. The statues, though faceless, seemed to follow. My camera captured details. The mind tried to ignore faint outlines. In reflections, ripples in still water, where nothing had moved. When Callum tapped my shoulder, I nearly screamed into my regulator. He pointed at his depth gauge. It was time to ascend. As we rose, I glanced down one last time. The statue in the square, the one I'd photographed earlier, now stood upright. I could have sworn it had been leaning before. Maybe the current shifted it. Maybe I imagined it. But as the town faded into darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something down there had noticed us. And it didn't want us to leave. Back on the surface, everything felt too bright. The crew celebrated quietly, logging readings and exchanging handshakes. But I couldn't join them. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself it was just adrenaline, the aftershock of a long dive. Still, when I looked out across the grey water, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd left something behind. Or worse, that something had followed us up. That night, I stayed in the ship's lab to develop the photos. It's an old habit. I can't rest until I see what I've captured. There's a kind of thrill in watching an image slowly appear, grain by grain, like summoning a ghost from the dark. The first few shots were perfect wide angles of the town square, the collapsed roofs, the broken spire of the church. Beautiful, eerie, silent. I felt proud. But then, things started to appear that I couldn't explain. In one image, a shadow stretched across the street, too dark, too defined. At first I thought it was Callum's until I checked the frame before and after. He hadn't been there. In another photo, something was reflected in a window. Something tall, narrow, standing just beyond the beam of my light. The next frame empty. I convinced myself it was an artifact of the light, a glitch, a trick of water and movement. I'd seen those before. Easy to explain. But the deeper I went through the sequence, the more the shapes seemed to shift. They weren't consistent with refraction. They looked deliberate, like figures, trying to stay just out of sight. At one point, I noticed something even stranger. In one of the photographs, I could see myself, my reflection caught in a sheet of glass. But behind me, just over my shoulder, there was another diver. A third light. We'd only had two. I froze staring at that image until my vision blurred. My breathing grew shallow. I could almost hear the bubbles from my regulator again, the slow hiss of air in my ears. I printed the photo, stared at it under the red light of the lab. The longer I looked, the less certain I became of what I was seeing. The figures seemed to move just slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. The shadow deepened. I laughed out loud, then a brittle, nervous sound, and turned away. I told myself I'd been working too long, that exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But when I glanced back, the photo had slid off the table onto the floor. No draft, no vibration, just fallen. That was when I decided to stop for the night. I turned off the lights, locked the lab door, and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow standing behind me, just out of focus, waiting. I didn't tell anyone about the photographs at first. I told myself I needed more time to study them, to make sense of what I'd seen. But the truth is, I was afraid of what they'd say. I spent the next morning staring at the prints laid out across the lab table. Under the sterile light, the shadows seemed less menacing, almost mundane. Maybe they really were just tricks of the light, I thought. Maybe I'd made a fool of myself for feeling scared at all. Still, the images haunted me. Every time I blinked, I could see that third light, that impossible reflection, hovering behind me. It didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like an invitation. Dr. Howard stopped by later that afternoon. She moved quietly always, with that academic detachment, the kind that made you unsure if she was listening or simply waiting for you to finish talking. "How did the photos turn out?" she asked. I hesitated. "Good, but I think we missed a lot of the structural layout. The current was stronger than expected. Some areas weren't fully documented." That was my lie, my excuse. I couldn't tell her I wanted to go back because something invisible was lurking in the corners of my pictures. Howard tilted her head. "You think we should do another dive?" "Yes," I said too quickly. "A full panoramic set. We could map the town in 360 degrees, digitally reconstruct it. It'd help with historical comparisons." Her eyes narrowed, curious but intrigued. "That would be valuable," she said slowly. "If the budget allows, I can authorize it." It worked, she agreed. But as she walked away, I caught a flicker in her expression, something like hesitation, maybe guilt. I should have noticed it then. I should have asked why she seemed afraid of her own approval. That evening, I found Callum, leaning against the railing outside the mess hall, a mug of something steaming in his hand. The sea was calm again, too calm the surface, like black glass, reflecting the pale sky. When I told him we were going back, he didn't smile. "Another dive," he said. "You're serious?" I nodded. He sighed, rubbing his face. "You're chasing something, mate. I can see it. But are you sure it wants to be found?" I almost told him about the photos, then about the shadow, the reflection, the third light. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "I just need to see it again. There's something down there I can't explain." He studied me for a long time, then finally nodded. "All right, we'll do it your way. But this time, we stick together. No wandering off for the perfect shot." We clinked mugs, but neither of us laughed. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I tried to convince myself this was about science documentation history art. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't about the past. It was about the thing I'd seen in that glass, and the way it had been looking back. The sea was flat that morning. No wind, no waves, just the dull, endless gray of the North Sea, stretching into nothing. It felt like the world was holding its breath, Callum checked our gear in silence. He didn't joke like before. Every click of a buckle, every hiss of compressed air felt heavy. I could sense the unease in him, the kind that comes from instinct, not reason. Dr. Howard watched from the deck as we prepared to dive. Her face was pale, drawn tight. She gave us a nod that didn't look like confidence, more like resignation. The water closed over my head, and the noise of the surface vanished. All that remained was the rhythm of my breathing and the faint crackle of static over the comms. We descended through the green twilight. The deeper we went, the darker it became, as if the sea itself was swallowing the light. At 80 feet, the first outlines of Raven Serad began to appear. But it didn't look the same. The town felt different. The visibility was lower, the water thicker, heavier somehow. The streets seemed narrower, the angles sharper. Even the corals that had glowed with color days ago now looked pale-drained, as though something had drawn the life from them. We passed the church again, its steeple leaning like a broken tooth, and I felt a strange vibration through the water. Not sound, not movement, a presence. Callum's voice crackled through my headset. You feel that I wanted to say no, to blame it on the current, but I couldn't lie. Yeah, I whispered. We continued deeper through what had once been the marketplace. The statue in the center was still there, half covered in silt, but it looked different too. Its head was tilted slightly, now facing us. I stopped swimming. My light hovered over its stone eyes. For a moment, I could have sworn they reflected back. Callum tugged my arm. Let's keep moving. We entered a narrow street lined with ruins. The buildings seemed to close in their windows, yawning black and empty. I raised my camera and began to shoot, slow, deliberate, the flash cutting through the murk like lightning. Each time the light went off, I saw something in the corner of my eye. A blur, a flicker, a shape that vanished when I turned. I told myself it was just shadows, but there was no current strong enough to move like that. At one point, my camera caught something I didn't see with my eyes, a streak of darkness crossing the frame. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't light distortion. It had form. Callum swam closer, his hand firm on my shoulder. You all right? I nodded, but my breath was uneven. Every instinct screamed that we shouldn't be here. Yet I couldn't stop. Something deeper than curiosity pulled me forward. We reached the edge of town, the remnants of a seawall. Beyond it lay open darkness, stretching into the abyss. The sonar blinked on my wrist display, faint reading shapes moving just outside range. Then I heard it. A low, distant hum. Not mechanical, not human. It vibrated through my chest like the sound of something vast waking up. Callum heard it too. What the hell is that? Before I could answer, the water around us shifted a current, sudden and violent, dragging at our legs. The silt erupted in a cloud. I grabbed a rock, anchoring myself, but Callum was nearly pulled away. Through the haze, I saw movement. Something massive, indistinct, gliding between the ruins. Not solid, more like a shadow swimming through shadows. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. My camera shook in my hand, and still I took another photo. The flash went off. For half a second, the entire square lit up, and there, standing in the light, were figures. Dozens of them. Human shapes unmoving, facing us. Their outlines were faint, translucent, like echoes of people left behind by time. Then the flash died, and they were gone. I wanted to surface, to leave everything and everyone behind. But when I looked at Callum, I saw the same terror in his eyes that I felt in mine. We couldn't even speak. We just turned and started back toward the ascent line. As we swam upward, I felt it again. That same pull, stronger this time, dragging at my gear, tugging me back toward the ruins. Not a current, not gravity, something alive. My chest tightened. My regulator hissed in panic breaths. I didn't dare look down, but I could feel it. Something rising beneath us. And I swear, I heard voices in the water, faint, distant, calling my name. The moment we turned back toward the surface, the sea changed. The water grew colder, heavier, like the whole ocean had decided to resist us. I kept my light on the ascent line, the thin white rope vanishing upward into the gloom. Callum swam a few meters ahead, his movements sharp and fast, too fast for safety. His breathing came over the comms in quick bursts. "Easy," I said. "Slow down." No reply, only static. I checked my gauge, everything normal. Depth 60 feet. Oxygen good. But my heartbeat wouldn't slow. I kept feeling the pull, not just a current, but a deliberate drag, as if fingers had hooked into the fabric of my suit. Something brushed against my ankle. I spun light, cutting through the darkness. Nothing. Just silt swirling like smoke. But then, out of the corner of my mask, I saw it a ripple in the black shaped, almost like a person. Before I could react, Callum shouted through the comms, "Ollie." The rest was drowned out by a rush of static and bubbles. I turned just in time to see him slammed sideways into the wall of a building. His regulator tore free air, bursting from his mouth in a white cloud. His eyes were wide, panicked. He clawed at the wall, kicking against something I couldn't see. I swam toward him, fighting the drag lungs, burning. I grabbed his harness, pulled the spare regulator from his vest, jammed it between his lips. He gasped, coughed, and then nodded, eyes glassy, but focused. And then I looked down. Below us, the street wasn't empty anymore. Figures were gathering faint human shapes, drifting up from the sand, their arms outstretched, faces blank. They weren't swimming. They were rising. I felt the world tilt vertigo, twisting my stomach. My hands trembled as I lifted the camera out of instinct, like it could save me. I snapped a photo. The flash went off. For a heartbeat, everything was bright. And in that light, I saw them clearly, dozens of figures in tattered clothes, eyes, hollow hair floating like seaweed. They were watching us. The flash died. Darkness swallowed them. Callum grabbed my arm, pointed upward. We kicked for the surface hard. Every muscle screamed. The pressure in my chest was unbearable, but I didn't care. I just wanted air. The current fought us, dragging us back toward the town. The line above snapped taut, vibrating, like something had grabbed it from below. Callum's flashlight flickered. I saw his face twist in terror, and then he was yanked backward. "Callum," I screamed into the comms, but my voice was drowned by static. I reached for him, but he vanished into the black. For a moment, I froze, the kind of fear that paralyzes the soul. Then through the haze, a shape emerged. Callum, alive, thrashing, pulling against something unseen. His knife flashed once, slicing through water, and suddenly he broke free, kicking toward me. I reached him. Together we fought upward, tearing through the gloom, the darkness boiling beneath us. I didn't dare look down again. When we finally broke the surface, the world erupted into noise waves, shouts the crew hauling us aboard. My lungs felt shredded. I ripped off my mask and gasped. Callum collapsed beside me, coughing, seawater eyes wild. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The others circled asking questions, but I couldn't hear them. Because somewhere below in that drowned town, something was still moving, and I knew it hadn't tried to kill us. Not yet. It had only warned us once. The deck was chaos when they pulled us aboard. Hands-grabbed voices, shouted questions blurred together, but none of it reached me. The cold had sunk too deep. My ears rang with the hiss of my own breath, the ocean still inside me. Dr. Howard was there waiting. Her eyes went straight to me, then to Callum. The bruises, the cuts, the haunted look on our faces. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. I tore off my gloves and stumbled to my feet. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. It came out low, shaking, but steady enough to make the crew go quiet. Howard blinked, her composure faltering. "Oliver, you knew something was down there." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "You sent us anyway." The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the wind answered, soft whistling between the metal rails. Then she sighed long and tired, like someone giving up a secret that had been heavy for years. "I didn't know for certain," she said quietly. "Not until now." Callum stared at her, jaw clenched. "What does that mean?" Howard looked out at the water. "Ravenssered isn't just a ruin. It was a warning." She told us then about the previous expeditions. Teams that had gone before us, all reporting the same things. Whispers in the comms, strange figures on sonar equipment, failing without reason. One team member never came back. They said he'd gotten lost in a sudden current, but Howard's voice trembled when she said it. "The sea took them," she whispered, "but not like a storm takes a ship. It chose them." Callum's fists tightened. "And you sent us anyway." She nodded. "We needed proof. Something visible. Something undeniable. I thought maybe with cameras we could understand it. Capture it. Explain it." I laughed bitter hollow. "You don't understand. It doesn't want to be captured." Her eyes met mine then, and for the first time I saw fear in them. "I know," she said softly. "I saw your photographs. That stopped me cold." "You what?" "I looked at the scans while you were asleep after the first dive," she admitted. "I saw the figures. I told myself they were tricks of light, but they moved between frames. They changed position. I wanted to scream at her, but I couldn't, because I realized something she hadn't said. She'd been afraid to stop, afraid that whatever we'd disturbed would come looking if we didn't finish what it started. The sun was setting by the time we reached the harbor. The water below looked calm again, gentle, even like it hadn't swallowed our screams hours ago. Callum backed in silence. I did too. None of us spoke of going back. None of us had to. Before I left the ship, Dr. Howard handed me a sealed envelope. "For the record," she said. Inside was a single photo, one of mine from the second dive. I hadn't taken it. It showed the town square, the statue, the church, the empty street. And in the center of the frame, barely visible through the murk, were two divers. Me and Callum. Behind us in the distance, something else stood, taller, darker, blurred by the silt. Its arms hung too long, its head tilted as if listening. Howard's handwriting was scrawled at the bottom. It was never empty. I left the Seapast project the next morning. No ceremony, no final meeting. Just packed my gear, kept my head down, and walked off the dock without looking back. The air smelled different on land cleaner somehow, but I couldn't enjoy it. The sea had left something behind in me. The sound of water, the pressure in my chest, the echo of voices that didn't belong to memory. Callum didn't talk much after that. We kept in touch for a while, short messages, polite check-ins. But after a few weeks, his replies stopped. No goodbye, no reason, just silence. Part of me was relieved. Another part still checks for his name online, sometimes, half expecting to see an obituary or a missing persons report. I tried to move on. I took other photography jobs, wedding studio work, anything that didn't involve water. I deleted the dive footage. I even sold the underwater housing for my camera. But the sea doesn't let go that easily. A month later, I woke one night to the sound of dripping. At first, I thought it was the pipes in my flat. I got up half asleep and followed the noise to my office, the small room where I kept my computer and editing setup. The monitor was on. I hadn't left it that way. A folder sat open on the desktop. It was labeled Raven Sirad Second Dive, a folder I was certain I'd erased. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were dozens of images I didn't remember taking. Grainy, waterlogged stills, some showing the ruins, others showing only blackness. But at the very end, there was one file, just one. The name read IMG666JPG. I opened it. It was the square again. The same statue, the same crooked spire. But this time, the angle was wrong higher, as if the photo had been taken from above, looking down at the town. At the bottom of the frame, a figure stood in the middle of the street. It wasn't Callum. It wasn't me. The face was blurred, but I knew what I was looking at. The same shape from the dive. The same thing that had watched us rise. And behind it, rising from the dark water at the edge of the frame, were more. I stared until the screen went black. My reflection looked pale in the glass, ghostly in the dim light. For a second, I thought I saw movement behind me, just a shift like something leaning close enough to look over my shoulder. I turned. Nothing. The next morning, the folder was gone. No trace of it anywhere. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see that town silent waiting. And when it rains, I swear I can hear it. The low hum beneath the thunder. The sound of the deep calling me back. I've given up trying to prove what happened. No one would believe me anyway. But if you ever dive off the coast of Yorkshire, if you ever see the ruins beneath the waves, don't take pictures. Don't look too long. And whatever you do, if something in the dark looks back at you, don't look back. Quiet, reflective, like a last breath after the storm. The sea keeps its secrets well, but every so often, it lets one rise just long enough for someone to see, to remember to fear. Maybe Oliver Stubbs was right. Maybe Raven Sirad was never empty. Maybe it's still waiting. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to NightLore, where the dark finds a voice. Until next time, keep your lights low, your doors locked, and your eyes away from the water, because the deep never forgets.